Hi, Dan Goodstein here with RPA AI and the Digital Enterprise Institute. Welcome to the Executive Interview Series. Today's part of a two-part series. We'll be talking to a senior RPA executive who's run some of the top RPA players in the space about how we got here, dispel some of the rumors and hype around RPA, and what does RPA look like in a post-COVID-19 world. Shail Khiyara is a thought leader on automation and kind of a unicorn in the space, having worked for the top three RPA players. Shail, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me here, Dan. It's good to see you again.
So before we jump into your unique perspective, give everyone a sense of where you've been and what you've been doing over the last several years.
Well, I've spent the last half decade in RPA, intelligent automation space. I've worked for the top three players in automation. I was the chief marketing officer at Automation Anywhere, the first CMO for Automation Anywhere. And following that, I was hired by Blue Prism as their chief customer officer and then took on the CMO role as well. And more recently at UiPath as the customer experience officer. So I can say I've had my share of RPA experiences in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you have a very unique perspective having worked in all three of the big players. What's your sense though now? You're not at any of those players now. And so I'm curious as to your honest assessment of, is this space, is the RPA space overhyped? I mean, you see some of these valuations, multiple $7 billion plus valuations. Is it overhyped?
Well, I think there is some hype in the market for sure. I think there is hype in particularly in hyper growth situations, but it is worth it. And if you'd like, I can give you a little bit of a view on the market and where we've been.
Yeah, please.
So let me share. One of the primary principles of strategic thinking is about markets in particular is to look forward and reason backwards. So let's take a look a little bit backwards in time to understand the current state of where we are. Right. I've been a student of multiple markets for many years, and this one is quite interesting, the RPA market, because it does not have the characteristics of the foundation that you see in other markets, even in other hyper-growth situations. And the two most important ones that come to mind are adoption and scale, right? In 2018, the equation for RPA was distinctively different than what you see in 2020. 2018, there were about 4,000 customers, three large players that I mentioned, about $950 million of investment that went into this space. And the three major players did about approximately $400 million in revenue, depending on which report you look at, and collectively had a valuation of roughly $5 billion. However, 85% of the customers had less than 10 robots, and the average utilization of a robot was about 50%. So you fast forward that to 2019, and we see acquisition number 2 and 3 occur in this market. Acquisition number 1 was OpenSpan by Pega, and number 2 and number 3 were Autonomy that was acquired by Blue Prism, and Contextor by SAP. In 2019, Microsoft also enters into this market, and the partner ecosystem grew, and partner loyalties were, shall we say, more distributed than in 2018. However, roughly now 9,000 customers in 2019, which includes the freemium customers, people who have downloaded the free versions of various different softwares in this market, 80% of them still had less than 10 robots, and the bot utilization had gone up from 50% to a whopping 60%. Right? Another $750 million worth of investment went into this market. So we're now in the first half of 2020, and the landscape has changed. Acquisition number 4 occurs with Appian acquiring Nowhere, who's the developer of the Jidoka platform. Microsoft announces disruptive pricing in the market. And just this weekend, there was some speculation about Microsoft and Softomotive. So with that as a backdrop, till today, after actively participating and shaping this market for the last 4.5, 5 years, the most common question I get from investors, customers, and partners, it's still about how do we sift through the hype in this market? Earlier this year, I published an article called Cheaper by the Dozen, and it highlights the fact that customers are confused, struggling to scale, trying to make sense of this milkshake of acronyms that exist in the market. So yes, there is hype. Look, I've run businesses as a GM, and I've been a CMO and Chief Customer Officer in prior roles. I'm all for responsible marketing and selling, but it's perplexing to see some CMOs talk about the strength of the market based on Google AdWords trends of certain acronyms versus as a barometer for success versus looking at, customer satisfaction, customer lifetime value, retention. And I've counted 12 terms that are being thrown around in the market amidst this hype, and now there's a 13th. I just saw last week a new term called connective automation, which adds to the list of RPA, RDA, DPA, digital workforce, hyperautomation, IPA, digital twins, complemented RPA, connected RPA, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a plethora of terms that are being thrown around. Have you heard of connective automation, Dan, by the way? Or is
Oh, that's a new one on me, and I'm all about acronyms at RPA AI. So
look, your other part of your question was, is it worth it? It absolutely is. RPA is a technology, as you know, that mimics human behavior in a rule-based environment and predominantly with structured data. And it's a form of business process technology which is governed by software robots, or bots as they're called. It goes across 48 different verticals and has a strong adoption in banking, financial services, and insurance, which is where it started. We've seen a lot of use cases around invoice processing, account reconciliation, employee onboarding and offboarding, time record validation, many, many more. And now you're starting to see use cases emerge to take advantage of how to help healthcare workers in the pandemic that we're in. So there is value in RPA. It is a blunt instrument in many ways, and there is quite a bit of hype in the market. Sorry for that long answer. I hope that's helpful.
No, thank you. Yeah, well, and so I want to narrow down on something though. So why has it been so explosive though? And what do you think is the biggest misconception out there when you've spoken to clients?
Well, clearly there are many pockets of success with RPA, right? However, there are few scale stories, which is not surprising considering the internal adoption within an organization. Over 80% of the customers having less than 10 bots. A few have scaled well, and there are some very interesting use cases that one would not have thought of. Companies like Schneider Trucking, BNY Mellon, in terms of scale, right? Schneider, BNY Mellon, AT&T, for example. The first two are Blue Prism customers. The last one is an Automation Anywhere customer, I believe. We have a ways to go. There are challenges, and customers are and have been highlighting these challenges to vendors for the longest time. In fact, Gartner is not silent about this. If you look at the Magic Quadrant, a lot of people look at the quadrant itself and look at the various different positions. But if you read it cover to cover, they talk about the fact that integration features are not robust or an intelligent workforce. They talk about the fact that RPA does not easily automate long-running processes, particularly when you get into complex end-to-end and case management type of scenarios. They talk about the fact that RPA tool is just one element of integration and the whole digital ops automation. They also talk about the fact that RPA creates long-term technical debt rather than covering it. And this is published in the Gartner report. So I think it's been explosive primarily because there is a faster approach with RPA to address some of the longer lead time integration challenges that exist in the organization. Has it been impactful as we hear on the outside, which is your question? In certain pockets, it has. In certain pockets, you do see good ROI with RPA, but it's not the only tool that would be used for automation.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to ask you, are you a purist around RPA, meaning RPA is the end all, or do you think it needs some other complementary technologies, AI, advanced OCR? Because one of the things I hear often is, isn't RPA just kind of a band-aid solution, right? So what's your thoughts on that?
Look, RPA alone is not enough. It gives you the arms and legs to handle subsets of an entire end-to-end process. It does need all those elements that you mentioned and more to drive autonomous end-to-end automation. Unfortunately, the foundation of RPA still requires some level of manual coding. You still need developers to develop the robots and maintain the set of bots. You need a center of excellence to drive governance and operational management of these bots. The challenge lies in how RPA is marketed and sold. It is often positioned as easy to use and deploy, citizen development promises, etc., some of which leads to mismatched expectations. I'm not saying that all of that is entirely inaccurate, but it leads to mismanaged expectations with the customers. HFS produced a survey, I think it was last year, that talked about 13% of, I'm going by memory, 13% of RPA projects, only 13% scale. Right? It is a blunt instrument. Perhaps it's best described as a recent example of a situation in our country at the moment. Last week, the US SBA, Small Business Administration, announced that it had restricted the use of RPA. Did you hear about this, Dan?
Yes.
Yeah, and they announced a restriction on the use of RPA to enter into this Paycheck Protection Program loan applications for small businesses. And there was a good analysis done on that, which is on the web. The challenge here was that RPA vendors have been marketing their success with supporting the Small Business Administration, which is a noble cause. And but in the zeal to support the SBA system was getting hit by hundreds or thousands of bots and creating a havoc in their legacy system. Now, one can argue that it is a legacy system and needs to be overhauled, and I'm all for digital transformation. But the question is, if RPA is continued to be sold as an easy solution, it's a blunt instrument that puts all the risk on the loan requester. Now, SBA has shut this down. The loan requester can't get their loans or can't get their applications in. I think in a world of delivering value and excuse me, customer experiences, should an automation vendor or an ecosystem of the automation vendor, partners included, bear the responsibility of providing a comprehensive, scale-ready, scale-capable, tested and QA'd automation outcome that fits the environment in which the bots are being deployed, right? It's also possible to throttle the speed of a well-built RPA process. There are various vendors that are able to do that. So there seems to be a lack of design and impact analysis that's been involved in this. So my point is, respect the deployment environment versus an expeditious promise that is made for quick outcomes. And automation absolutely cannot live in a vacuum. So these other technologies, to your question, are absolutely required.
So you touched upon scaling. I think at least pre-COVID-19, the top question I heard from members is, again, how do we scale this enterprise wide? How do we scale this beyond this process, this particular function? What is your advice for those that are struggling with scaling and also the overall management of bots that comes with that?
Well, I think scaling is one of the paramount topics of discussion amongst customers, next to bot fragility in this market. I think scale, when we talk about scale, scale is actually an outcome. There are certain elements that have to fall in place in order to scale. You need to find the right champion in their organization, someone who knows about, the right security, the governance, the analytics. You have to demonstrate clear and distinct ROI to an organization beyond the POC phase, if you started a POC phase, which is one of the reasons why you see a majority of the customers having, or 80% of the customers having less than 10 robots. It's the demonstration of clear and distinct ROI, which is not FTE based anymore, as it was several years ago. For scale, there's this whole concept of what I call U2, which is usage and utilization. How often are the bots being used? What percentage of the time are they being utilized? Are they running multiple instances of that process? Are they running a single instance of that process? I think those are critical elements to understanding scale. I think ensuring that the CIO and the business unit have a symbiotic synergy and culture is often critically important. In some instances, the reason you don't see scale is perhaps that the bots have been sold into a business unit environment, and now in order to scale beyond the 5, 8, 10 bots, the CIO is now involved and is asking questions around security, governance, right, scalability, infrastructure, which are all critically important elements. So make sure that the CIO and the business unit synergy absolutely exists. And I would say lastly, just capping it to what I said earlier, which is the scale is an outcome, not a solution. All of these elements have to fall in place in order for a automation program to scale.
So, Shail, one final question. You've been, I think, privy to probably hundreds of RPA projects, some successful, some I'm sure less than successful. What would you say is your parting advice for anybody watching today, as far as some of the key elements they should look for to make sure it's a successful implementation?
Embrace RPA. Realize that it is a blunt instrument. Have a clear, distinct end goal in mind in what you are trying to automate and what you want to achieve in the organization. I would say that look at the broader set of automation technologies that come together in order for you to achieve that automation goal inside of your organization, as opposed to viewing RPA as being the entire solution itself.
Great. Thank you. Good advice. Well, that's it for this part one. We're going to be jumping into part two shortly and talking about what RPA looks like in a post-COVID-19 world. So please check that out. In the meantime, Shail, thanks for joining us.
Dan, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Take care.
Bye now.